start with Dr. Martin Mills and the introduction to Dr. Martin Mills. He's a chair in anthropology and director of Scottish Centre for Himalayan Research at the University of Aberdeen in Scotland. He's author of Identity, Ritual and State in Tibetan Buddhism. His research interests lie in the history of religious and constitutional organization, Tibetan monastic and governmental life. On the public front, Mills has acted as member, briefings officer, and parliamentary secretary to the cross-party group on Tibet at the Scottish Parliament since 2007 and speaks widely on Tibetan political and environmental matters. Martin, over to you.
All right. Firstly, I need to apologize for not being there. I'm really sorry. I have to say, your Anthropology Library looks lovely and very cozy in comparison with my garden shed in the north of Scotland. I'm starting off today, so I'm going to work out the assumption that most people are pretty familiar with the institution of the Dalai Lamas. The institution, this is presently the 14th Dalai Lama. It goes back, obviously, to the first Dalai Lama, Gedundrup, in the 14th century. And there's a process of reincarnation which leads from one Dalai Lama to the others throughout time. And that is unlike some of the other traditions in Tibetan Buddhism, that is a straight lineage of individuals that are recognized one after the other as kind of a rosary bead, if you like. Now, I'm simply going to talk to one particular point. There are so many issues to be raised here, but I'm going to speak to one particular point, which is actually a legal point. So this, in a sense, is a discussion about the way in which the international community looks at this question. There is a tendency in present debates about the potential reincarnation of the Dalai Lama that is inflected by the way in which people think about what the Dalai Lama institution is. Now, in the present moment, the debate is largely one that is framed in terms of religious rights versus a communist state that is technically atheist. The point that I want to make is a much simpler point and a much more straightforward point, but it's a point that has very substantial and profound implications for understanding the whole thing, in a sense, which is that we need to understand that at all legal levels, the Dalai Lamas exist within Tibetan law as a person and not an office, okay? And keeping that in mind is really vital. Just from a simple legal perspective, an office holder cannot will the property of their office onto the next office holder or to somebody else. Donald Trump, no matter what he may think in the future, cannot give a will and testament to which he hands the White House over to his son, even if he wants to. Okay. Whereas because it's an office. Whereas I, as a person, can give my house to my daughter or whomsoever I wish, because it belongs to me as a person. Now, that's a really important point, because it's not one you actually have to believe in reincarnation or be a Buddhist to understand. It's a point in international law about inheritance law. So my central point here, to a large extent, is we need to understand that the Dalai Lamas and the Dalai Lama's reincarnation exists within the context of personal inheritance law. And we need to think about it in those terms, because if members of the international community want to kind of sort of say, oh, well, this is a Chinese matter, nonetheless, they are saying we are not going to hold the question of personal inheritance law. It's also important because it inflects upon the way in which Tibetans always have understood this tradition. And it inflects upon who gets to be involved in seeking and recognizing a reincarnation. So let's just talk about this very, very quickly, and I know I don't have long. What do I mean when I say the Dalai Lama is understood as a person, not an office? Well, as a person, from a Tibetan perspective, he has one or more linked namtas, or personal spiritual biographies. Okay, and those are seen as holding together in a chain, literally a putram, a rosary bead of lives, in which it is understood that the personal consequences of things that happened in previous lives apply to the person of the Dalai Lama right now. So, for example, I don't want to go into this in too technical a detail. An incarnate Lama of any lineage is broadly understood to have, for example, mastered to a high level the completion stage yogas of the highest yoga tantra traditions, such that they can control to a greater or lesser extent their death, their bardo period, and their reincarnation. And whether or not that's the whether or not that's the clear light practices or it's the illusory body practices, all of those are, to a large extent, in the Tibetan tradition. They focus on that question of what occurs between a death and a rebirth in terms of its capacity for spiritual attainment. And incarnate lamas are understood as having achieved in a previous life. So in this case, either in the life of Gedundrup or even before that, to have attained that mastery. And that is part of their biography as a person. Secondly, the Dalai Lama's estate, the Ganden Potong, is seen to belong to him as a person and to have been given to him in various different bits over the course of multiple lifetimes as a religious gift to him as a personal teacher. It's not part of his office, it's not held together by law, but instead it is something that, for example, those sections of the Ganden Potong that were given to him by Gushri Khan were given as a religious gift and an offering to the fifth Dalai Lama as a person, and they added to the Dalai Lama's personal estate as it went on. The third point, as far as him being a person is concerned, is that many of the relationships which are related to the Ganden Potong are related to the Dalai Lama institution. Things like, for example, the nature oracles and the oracles that attend upon him, many of which are involved in the reincarnation process, are either individuals, incarnate lamas, or even gods that have previously personally known the Dalai Lama. And in the case of gods, for example, so Palan Hamo, PoR, Betse, all of these, at some point in the past, usually during the lifetime of the first to the fifth Dalai Lamas, or in their death, actually, occasionally, have personally offered him their protection and friendship. Okay? And that is why, people often speak of this rather strange relationship the Dalai Lama has often with the state oracle nature, that it's a very close and intimate relationship. And it's meant to be. It's meant to be a relationship of friendship that has passed over multiple lifetimes. So those relationships are seen as existing within what is often referred to as the karmic continuum of the person of the Dalai Lama. And they come back lifetime after lifetime as far as the Tibetan tradition is concerned. And that also exists with reference to certain places. So in particular, we can think of Lama Latso, we can think of the Matala, Mapuri Hill, we can think of Samye. All of these are seen as having a specific, I suppose the term here would be tendril or karmic connection with the Dalai Lama as a person and are linked to that karmic continuum. So this is the Tibetan religious perspective that really sees the Dalai Lama as a teacher who reincarnates from lifetime to lifetime and has a series of linked personal biographies that make one long chain of biographies in which the past influences the personal present. Now, what that means to a certain extent is that those that are seen as involved in the reincarnation process, seeking out the new child and so on and so forth, are generally ones that are seen to be able, in a very straightforward way, to recognize the new Dalai Lama, to be able to see it in the person of the new incarnation. In the same way as, for example, for those who are familiar with French culture, in the same way that Martin Guerre comes back from war after 10 years, who is it that's seen as a witness that can recognize that person? Well, his wife, his kin, and so forth. It's not the magistrate that oversees the case, it's those witnesses. And here we see that in the relationship of the various tendril and karmic continuum connections with the Dalai Lama as linked, whether that's the Panchen Lama, which I appreciate is a very political point, but the Nechung Oracle and so on and so forth. All of these are seen as being people that, as a consequence of previous connections, can recognize the person of the Dalai Lama. And this is important because it's a personal thing rather than something that is enshrined and encased in law. Okay, this is something we actually discussed quite a bit at Harvard and most conversations. there's a big question. Well, how do we make a law that somehow captures this? Well, the answer is you don't, because the estate of the Dalai Lama is something that is given in trust to effectively his executors, who hand it back to him as an offering in the next life. So it is a bottom-up approach to the question. Now, as far as all of this is therefore concerned, just to sort of to finish up, the clash between the Tibetan approach to a large extent and the Chinese communist approach is therefore that they are kind of looking for two entirely different kinds of things. The Chinese communist approach, as set out in law, as set out in Order Number 5 in the MMR regulation, going all the way back to the Ching period, is to look for an office of the state into which you place a person. Whereas the Tibetan tradition is to look for a person who is, in some sense, actually the source of law, rather than encapsulated and sort of imprisoned, in a sense, by it. So in this sense, they kind of really are looking to two quite different things, and what they share is a name, but not very much beyond that. Okay, I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Martin. Hope you can keep hearing us, in which case then you are still around with us.